Oh man, I'm so close to finishing all of these rebalances after a long few weeks, man. I can't wait to get all of these changes in and getting this video out, although I guess it could use a little bit more testing. No sandbox mode is gonna be a pain, but gotta get through it. Let's see, Roblox, TDX, oh, wait, what? They're making a rebalance update already? 30 towers being changed? 2 new maps? Oh man. Juggernaut has AoE and Freeze is getting reworked? What? Oh great Buddha! So yeah, if you haven't heard by now, TDX is having its very own Shock and Awe update, coming in only 2 weeks too. And it seems like there's already been some pretty crazy leaks, like the return of the GOAT Juggernaut, Operator being able to spawn an LEV, and so much more. And I thought it'd be a pretty fun idea to rebalance almost every tower in TDX, changing their stats and abilities. And I've actually been working on this video ever since Ultra released, since I felt like the meta was getting pretty stale at this point, and I feel like everyone else agrees too. So this has been a project long in the making. You and I both know it's gonna be a pretty long video, so let's just get into the meat and potatoes of it. Now, before we begin, I just wanted to establish what the goals of these rebalances are. So first off, I wanted each tower to be really unique, having pretty good usage even after you get later towers like, Ghost versus Operator. I think tower defense games are just so much more fun when progression isn't linear, and a lot of towers are just simply forgotten after you get better ones, and that just makes previous content become forgotten, which isn't really healthy for the game. And secondly, a lot of these changes are also focused on transforming each tower by solidifying their role that they already have, if they're already effective at it, or it might be giving them a new niche. And a lot of towers in TDX are really cool, but they just overlap in their niche, and it's hard to justify the use of one over the other. And thirdly, this means that a lot of the focus will be put into making previous intermediate towers, like Missile Trooper, feel a lot better. Now, fourth, some towers also don't deliver on their fantasy, so I really want to help them be more mechanically interesting, like their visuals would imply them to be. And finally, I want to reduce spawner meta to the ground, as everyone unanimously agrees it's just been so strong for a while. Like 5 whole months, oh my gosh. Part of why they've been so strong is because of their ignore resistances, as well as the fact that enemies do way too much damage to ground towers. If you want a more in-depth look at my balancing methodology and goals, as well as any of the stat changes in this video, the document will be in the description below for you to check out. But this is the main gist of it, I feel. With all that said, I luckily had the help of many cool dudes like Hippo, Scooby, Kleinerman, Pap, Epiczill, Remy, 10 Letters, Cheese, Vendetta, Noob Joiner, Whitstone, Mr. V, Fractured, Honey Tea, and so many others who gave me support. Without these guys, I wouldn't have had as many cool concepts in my video. It was so fun discussing all of these different towers, and it helped me to really balance out my pretty crazy concepts. Also, I couldn't get Pap's changes implemented in time, so you'll see his thoughts throughout the video, and he can kind of be like the final reviewer or balancer, if you will. Without further ado, let's get into these changes, shall we? The important changes here for the general changes are firstly the iframes. A lot of the time in event game modes like Christmas Part 2 with Sogar or the Man vs Machine event, your towers just die too fast before you have any time to upgrade it, especially in the Robot Invasion event, oh my gosh. And also, towers who ignore ice resistance will be able to damage them now. Early game modes and quests give more gold and XP to help out early game players, and I also thought it would be fun if you get more gold for using different loadouts to incentivize switching it up every now and then, you know? And also it'd be nice if we had weekly challenges. They don't have to have too much effort put into them, where you get like set loadouts each week to be, you know, like a certain mode or wave layout. I think that would add a lot of replayability to the game. And also there will be new starter, intermediate, and advanced tower categories, as well as progression limits, so that players just can't skip to Nightmare Towers instantly, which I've done on my level 40 alt. And also to prevent players from doing this. Tower category synergies are also being added, so if you bring multiple towers from the same category, then they'll receive stat buffs to promote cooler loadout building, and just for extra fun, you know. And players will now have their own assigned bounty color for both Mobster variants. Finally, all intermediate, elite, and expert starter tower perks have been removed, and the existence of these is usually a good sign that there are few balancing issues for the intermediate or starter towers. And a good case of this is, you know, AA turret from Shattered Moon or Golden Mobster in Ultra mode with their higher cost upgrades. Getting into the tower changes, I will be as concise as possible, since if I were to read every single change, then, you know, the video would be 2 hours long. So yeah, Ranger is now given a flat 20% armor shred to be a nice like quality of life support for late game players, and this subtracts from the enemy's resistance amount and it's not percentage based. And you will see all quote-unquote Ranger type towers get this later on, you know, like Cryo Ranger, Golden Ranger, Laser Gunner, so yeah, keep an eye out for that. And now Shot Gunner. Shot Gunner has a smaller footprint and can clear corruption and damage over time or status effects, so it makes him a really solid option to bring against the Void and Emperor, along with his unstun and extra heals. Operator now gets into one of our first big changes. So Operator will have a stealth reveal passive at max top path. So once he damages an enemy for, you know, like 5 seconds, he will reveal them, which will be nice for like shadow bosses and tire battles or things like that. And usually having just one is already enough, especially if you're using an AoE tower like John. Operator will also get a new unique damage multiplier against stealth enemies of 1.5 times, and this will make him a really cost-efficient option against stealth enemies, which properly distinguishes it from ghosts. Bottom path, meanwhile, gets a mobile radar vehicle that is really slow and has a lot more health than the Humvee, and it reveals all stealth and air enemies within range, while switching the damage type from bullet to laser to give beginners quicker access to laser type damage, as, you know, all the other laser type towers you will see later in this list will have become a lot more expensive in the shop now. Sniper is a really underrated tower, being a very consistent option like artillery, but it's just too slow, you know? Sniper is made to play a lot faster at the top path, but it does lose like 14 range, which is really noticeable. But on the upside, it gets some extra pierce, really fast stealth regain time for extra survivability, and just better cost efficiency overall, being pretty similar in build to John's like 2-4 upgrade. And meanwhile, bottom path gets a little bit more range at the cost of lower CE to help with those early game expert clears. And Grenadier. Grenadier often lives in the shadow of RD and Missile Trooper, sadly, and he just doesn't live up to the other two in the trio. So he's now made to be like the de facto early game tower, being only 1,500 gold to unlock now. And with the higher splash radius on the earlier levels, he will absolutely shred the early game, especially in elite mode. And his bottom path also has hidden detection to take up a niche that Slammer can't compete with. And his top path is granted explosive resistance shred to be a nice quality of life support again. for endgame players, kind of like Ranger earlier. Missile Trooper is one of the most fun towers in the game, and oh my gosh, I absolutely loved using this tower when starting at TDX, but recent releases like Jet Trooper and Arty made him feel pretty forgotten over time. So he'll now cost 4,500 gold in the shop, but is made to be much more single target focused, with higher damage to better fit the mid game, but less splash as a negative downside, while his bottom path gets hidden detection to become the new AoE version of Missile Trooper. Laser Gunner now becomes much more viable in the late game. His bottom path stealth sensor ability now inflicts damage vulnerability and slow on stealth enemies who are revealed, so that it can compete with Ghost stealth reveal niche, because you know, Ghost drone stealth reveal is absolutely insane. And of course, the top half shock rounds, not only are they longer, but they will now reduce laser resistance by a flat 20% to be a valuable quality of life support duo with Refractor. And it also brings extra utility and sub DPS to the table through his bottom path. Toxinator. So yeah, Toxinator is made to be the jack of all trades resistant mode that other Ranger variants can't provide, but of course it will be at half the max percent. So instead of 20% that all other Ranger variants provide, his Toxic Blast now reduce every enemy's resistance by 10% flat. So that's kind of the downside of it, but it's still really good. And now Ghost. Ghost is made to have a lower level requirement to make elite mode more accessible to players and to smoothen progression to late game content, which in my opinion, and actually a lot of people's opinions, is the most fun part about TDX. Now farm. I'm surprised a lot of people don't use farm actually. I use it all the time in matchmaking and it's really helped me a lot. But anyhow, farm is buffed to have a higher cash income ceiling, and each level's cost efficiency is adjusted to make farm require a little bit more thought when upgrading it. And instead of upgrading the lowest levels before moving on to the next set, you know, the most cost efficient levels will now be the 2-2, 2-4, and of course rushing the tier 5 upgrade on the top path. And do note that the second crate on 2-5 falls much slower now, so that's the only caveat, but it does give more money overall. And these changes are also to make farm feel much more fitting for PvP's release in the future. And I also heard from Scooby that the green ring for the placement footprint is a bit bugged right now. So yeah, I think the devs should definitely take a look into that. Now Sentry has had a pretty long history. There is a lot of changes here, but it basically is reverted to his pre-nerf state, giving the top half extra pierce, range, and of course a 1.25 damage multiplier to hidden enemies. And meanwhile, the bottom half gets anti-air missile pods added on top of the normal missile pods it already has. And this kind of makes him a pseudo anti-air turret that's extremely cost efficient. Sentry's footprint size is decreased, and when upgraded to either path, he cannot be sold, which makes him a much more committal tower. Once he reaches 0 rebuilds, he will explode for 20% max health damage to nearby towers when he dies. And keep in mind, top half Sentry has extremely high aim time now, so be on the lookout for that. Now Jet Trooper. He gets his ignore bullet resistance back at a much higher cost. Juggernaut is buffed to have overall a lot more DPS and definitely a lot more range too. And to make him stand out from his golden counterpart, he now has a Death's Dance passive where he takes direct damage over an extended period of time, meaning you can mitigate the damage before he dies. For example, Eradicator Mark I Combat does 24,000 damage with his lasers, so for Juggernaut, he would take that 24,000 damage over 4.5 seconds instead of 1 instance. And in the off case that he does die, he will survive lethal strikes, surviving for 5 more seconds while having 150% damage buff before dying and dropping 25% cash back on death. Juggernaut is now a much more safer and sustainable option than Golden Juggernaut, at the cost of not having the higher damage ceiling that Golden Juggernaut has with, his really high DPS. And the base level Juggernaut is made $1,000 cheaper to be more cost efficient, and that makes him a better choice than Gold Juggernaut in future events, which is how it should be for most TD games. Goo Gunner has aged a lot better than Juggernaut for sure, but TDX is still missing a really good single target damage tower like Tower Battle's version of Goo Gunner. However, a problem we quickly came across when balancing Goo Gunner was that his range and survivability was just too good. So now Goo Gunner gains a new passive where the closer he is to his enemies, the more damage his projectiles would do at the cost of his survivability. It used to be the other way around, where the farther away he was, the more projectile damage he did, but we quickly realized it was just too strong. And there will also be a new overheat system to prevent players from using Goo Gunner to destroy bosses with his new higher range. Finally, top half gains a really fun gimmicky use of basically infinite pierce, where you can use it in elite mode a lot and destroy those mid-game waves, but it will definitely fall off when laser resistant enemies arrive. Machine Gunner is like the third part of the trio between Goo Gunner and Juggernaut, and I personally really enjoyed using Machine Gunner, but after his Nightmare nerfs, he has been pretty difficult to use. So now he's made to be like a buffable version of XWM, now costing around 32,000 gold, which is only like a bit more than XWM, and he is now a solid DPS contender against Golden Juggernaut. I always believe there should always be other DPS options, as the current ones are really limited. And Machine Gunner gets a new passive where he takes 50% less damage when enemies get close enough, and he also gets a smaller footprint to be friendlier to use on the tight Nightmare maps. Top half artillery gets extra burn DPS, while bottom gets more damage as a result of him losing his ignore explosive resistance from the robot invasion event. He now has a new passive on the bottom path where hitting shots in the inner radius will deal 1.35 times more damage, which is pretty solid actually. And he now becomes a lot more of a ground warship, with the bonus that he is buffable and takes a lot less space. Patrol boat feels like it'd be a really cool tower, especially because, it's like a boat and, there's not many naval towers in the game, but there's really nothing in his kit that drives home that fantasy of a patrol boat. So he now gains some passive income through a Coastal Funds passive timer. If you wait 20 seconds, you will receive the cash, but you can only receive this passive cash income 3 times per wave. You can also place towers on top of patrol boat as long as they have a less than or equal to footprint with Refractor. Additionally, he gains a stealth and air reveal every time his passive funds timer hits 0. Players must be near the patrol boat for the timer to go down, and his bottom path flamethrower gains a slow to be similar to Tower Battle's flamethrower. Until Warship is reworked, he definitely needs something to stay alive longer, as he just dies too fast and is often replaced by bottom path XWM, who's just a lot more sustainable and less of a cash drain. So he will now get a rebuild of 1 with a 240-second cooldown, meaning you just have to wait 4 seconds for it to rebuild, which is pretty good, but if you do need the extra DPS, then you always have the option to sell it and regain some of the money back. Now, I know these AA turret changes will be super controversial, but just hear me out, I still think the AA turret is still too strong for what it does, And this tower has single-handedly made the spawner tower just infinitely even more stronger, because instead of needing 2 players with either XWM or helicopter, you can save on slots with just one AA turret, allowing players to bring valuable compressed DPS options like Refractor or Behemoth. And this effect is even worse in quads, where 3 players can bring extra compressed DPS. And just having that one player with that extra DPS can make runs so much easier. So yeah, AA turret is just changed to still have the same strength as before, but the range of motion now requires you to have a lot more thoughtful placement. And this might, incentivize people to bring at least 2 AA turret users to cover for the other. If I'm being honest, these changes don't really do much, but it's the best we could think of until air enemies are reworked, as they're really the real problem of all of this. And I didn't want to add a placement limit because placement limits are definitely something you don't want to use as a crutch in balancing. And AA turret still performs as well as it did before if you just put in that little bit more effort. Medic has not been able to keep up with the recent max health % damage and enemy creep, so he is given max health % heal to combat that. So if he's healing a really high HP target like Psycho Slayer or Gold Juggernaut, his healing per second will be much higher now. And his crits ability also grants the medic itself an Uber as a nice quality of life change, but the target of the crits ability does not get Ubered for obvious reasons. Slammer gets a smaller footprint to make her feel a lot easier to use, especially in those tighter maps or those tighter corners. After the MREP nerf in the Tower Battles event, Armored Factory's bottom half just feels completely forgotten, so now he receives some of his previous power back, while the tanks get their much needed collision resistance and a new damage resistance stat that reduces damage from all sources by 20%. And the top half Bradley Tau missiles now have air detection to be more consistent with the Humvee turret missile pods. Barracks Riot Guards also received the new stat of 90% damage resistance to make him a really fun option in Xmas Part 2 for countering Wendigo hunters or other events. And Rail Trooper and M202 Trooper get flying detection for consistency with other towers, as well as adding extra versatility. Minelayer is just a total mess right now, so he is reworked to be like Trapper from TDS, playing much faster and eliminating crowds with mines, but he now has a mine limit. His top path will switches to rat bounding mines that move along the track when deployed. And I actually stole this idea from Rogue, who really wanted top half Minelayer to have roller skates, so I thought it'd be really funny if I added onto his idea. And the rat mines don't explode upon contact, but can be detonated by an ability to do big damage if you have the good micro, And keep in mind the mine limit for a top half is only 1 to 3 compared to the 8 of the base Minelayer. Bottom half now loses a lot more mine lifetime and max mine damage potential as a trade-off for playing so much faster, and it just deletes crowds with his thermite. And of course spike health is added so that small peons don't waste the precious mines. Mobster has a really cool design for a tower, but the top half just feels extremely hard to use and is outperformed by almost everything in the game. He gets a higher life insurance to have some better use cases and incentives over his golden counterpart. He now receives a new passive on top half, Gang's Ghoul, where his goons can no longer be targeted or collide against enemies. And this pushes a new goon heavy playstyle where you really want to stack them by skipping the waves or playing on long windy maps like Castellan Reach. And I really wanted Mobster to be like the crook boss of TDX, being extremely cost efficient and good for that early to mid game. and meanwhile his bottom path switches to a really strong Magnum with a 2x primary target damage multiplier and a 0.5 splash radius. While a lot of people may not like these changes, they have to happen sadly, and I'm sad to see it too. But Gold Mobster has been way too strong of an early game defender, and he just outpaces Ghost and Golden Ranger by miles. So he will lose a lot of his income in the early game and in his bounties. The Ultra Mode cost multiplier perk is removed to compensate, although I get the feeling he has a fate worse than what we've given him. Those who know, those who know. Golden Minelayer, just like the normal one, is too slow for modern TDX's rusher meta, where bursting targets down is a lot more efficient and higher priority. Bottom path is made to play a lot safer, but is still the long-term investment version of Minelayer. And the top half Golden Minelayer receives a mine limit but has much higher cost efficiency, and the crossbow now refunds 3 seconds of its cooldown if you land it on a target. These changes aim to make Golden Minelayer feel just a lot more fun and a lot more satisfying to use, as well as being faster paced. Golden Ranger often feels outclassed by Ghost, so he gets access to ignore golden resistance at 2x now, being the de facto best early game tower. And level 0 Golden Ranger is made to be more cost efficient to be better in speedruns. Pierce is granted to both paths, while the bottom path receives grenade damage buffs, a new incendiary round, and the grenade, like other Ranger variants, will now reduce golden resistance by 2% up to 20% max. And this is flat reduction, of course. Now for Gold Juggernaut, I had originally planned for him to do 2250 DPS, but obviously we found it was way too good. So Gold Juggernaut received some noticeable DPS buffs to 187 and some extra health to keep up with TDX's damage creep. His higher DPS ceiling helps him to be a lot more of a shinier option compared to Refractor. Speaking of Refractor, his top half is really underrated, but it could use another niche to help it stand out. So now it receives air detection in exchange for losing stealth detection. The chain range is increased by 1 or 2 studs, and the dynamic price scaling goes up to 10k for neater numbers' sake. War Machine is totally reworked to match the fantasy of a mech walker. This one is a long one, so bear with me for a second. The current bottom path War Machine just feels way too squishy to me, and it often dies to a random thumper or hunter who lands on him by accident. He now has a lower placement limit, becoming more like a hero tower or a vanguard on the field. I really wanted him to have much more of a presence when he was on the track. As a result, he can no longer spawn naturally. Instead, you'll need to use the airdrop ability to spawn him in wherever you want on the path. Upon summoning him, the airdrop ability will change to a leap, letting War Machine reposition anytime. War Machine also has 3 additional movement commands: walk forwards, stand still, or walk backwards. Finally, War Machine has an additional ability, War Machine's Aura, that ghosts the War Machine. So now he can no longer collide with enemies for the duration of the ability. War Machine's backswing goes from 2.5 seconds to 20 seconds to prevent him from walking into the spawn, which is one of the most painful things you could ever see while using bottom path War Machine. And his damage has of course been scaled up to match his new fantasy and his lower placement limit, which really just solidifies him as this awesome like mech walker avatar or hero type unit, you know? Behemoth has been too strong for its price, and its ignore resistance on his cannons and guns has been really problematic, and it just absolutely demolishes everything. So he loses all of this, and he becomes a lot more expensive on the top path, but he does get more HP and higher collision resistance to compensate. With Combat Medic's release, I feel like Shield Tower Micro being added back wouldn't be too far-fetched of an idea, considering Combat Medic can be a much safer failsafe than Shield. And bottom path Shield now regens top half Shield when it's in range, to help both synergize together better instead of choosing one over the other. And keep in mind, only the bottom path upgrades will reset the shield health now. However, jammers will now be able to disable the shield like intended, and in the future it should definitely be disabled by boss EMPs, rages, and the tracker and bombardier to give it proper counters in future game modes or events. Oil Derrick is an amazing tower already, but it could definitely use some buffs on the top half, especially that max upgrade, to be a lot more useful. His top half upgrades now give other players a percentage of the income you make, and it gives mechanical towers like XWM or Heli a 10% damage buff at max. And meanwhile, his bottom path gains a new 7.5% discount and a 7.5% sellback value that stacks with EDJ. The Oil Derrick discount does work on the max upgrades of any towers, and his bottom path now gives 25% cash per damage multiplier instead of 18%. Combat Medic Survive is too strong and has no drawbacks, especially if you can micro her, so she now cannot revive towers for 5 seconds after being upgraded to the top path. However, she has a new shield like the Engineer from TDX that negates all damage taken, and she can also survive lethal strikes. With all the Nightmare towers down, we will move on to our Vent towers. Cryo Ranger, like all the other Ranger variants, will be able to reduce the enemy's ice resistance by a flat 20%. Unlike other Ranger variants, the grenade can reduce ice resistance on bosses, and it will additionally slow them by 30% for 6 seconds. Meanwhile, the Cryo M203 rounds will elongate the thaw time on enemies already frozen by 50% to help other freeze towers like Cryo Blaster or Cryo Heli keep them frozen for much longer. Commander receives higher damage buffs to compete with EDJ, and this is to also make Gold Juggernaut and Machine Gunner feel more appealing compared to Refractor. His airstrikes deal more damage, and he can now summon 3 APCs instead of 1, and they all do a 5 stun knockback and a 2-point-second stun. Only the stun applies on bosses, however the ability costs $2,000 now. I actually got the idea for knocking back bosses with the APCs from Noob Joiner, the GOAT himself. So thank you for this idea. Z.E.D receives a small base price nerf to make it feel easier to use in the early game. Scarecrow seems like it would be an interesting tower, but its bait passive doesn't work on many attacks, and it doesn't even work on X soldiers or X juggernauts. Its bait attack should be coded to work on a few more attacks and a few more enemies. Flame Trooper receives most of its damage buffs back as its removal was not justified. It also has a new passive that lets it melt nearby frozen towers, making it a nice option to bring in Christmas events. Relic, just like any other spawner, receives heavy nerfs for demolishing every game mode they touch. He becomes a lot more expensive, has a lower placement limit, and all his ignore resistances have been removed. Seraph DPS has been decreased, but is still really solid. But nuclear tanks can now damage airborne units like Seraphs. As compensation buffs, the Phantom Overseer will now ignore collision resistance, and the Relic summon ability goes from 200 seconds to 180 seconds. Cryo Heli feels really difficult to use for casuals, so his freeze value changes are reverted back to when he released to help him feel a lot more satisfying to use. Along with having a smaller placement footprint, Icebreaker receives its previous freeze amounts on release to make it easier for casual use. The placement limit nerf back then was all it needed to stop players from ice shard stacking, and that was a crazy time to be in. Troll Tower has potential for a really fun rework, so now he becomes a full-on support tower that is somewhat inconsistent but can provide different effects. His ability now casts a healing field type of AoE on your towers, and it cycles through colors randomly, giving different effects for your towers and enemies, like 15% damage buff, Uber field, etc. If you click too fast and do the black field, it will reduce tower fire rate by 20% and range by 40%. I really liked old Goo Gunner's stun and that like amber visual effects. I don't know how you describe it, so I think it would be cool to see that again if her goo units would explode and their goo would visually stun enemies. Shock Trooper is already an amazing tower, but his main identity is the versatile detections and chain lightning, as well as his ignore obstacles. So his level 3 is made cheaper to give him faster access to flying detection, and he is made much more friendlier to use in multiplayer. Everyone unanimously agrees that Cryo Mortar has just been crazy strong for a while. So its boss slow is going from 50% to 25% cap, and his freeze and slow on hit is being removed, meaning he can no longer slow targets down with just 1 or 2 hits. And as a compensation buff, he will get his high freeze amounts back. Psycho Slayer is already a really good tower that doesn't need any changes if I'm being honest with you, but I just simply find his jump really clunky and boring. And despite having all these really cool weapons, it doesn't feel like there's much player input when using him, and the fantasy of a weapon switching Space Marine just isn't there for me. So he is reworked to be more of a hero tower like War Machine, being granted passive ability resets every time you use a jump ability. He also gains a new sword passive ability, sword chaining tech, a parry, 10% lifesteal, and is now immune to max health % damage to make him really feel like a tank. Psycho Slayer will now have an inner range, where if you use a jump ability in it, he will dash instead, spraying enemies with his dual guns before doing a sword attack. You then have a 3.5 second window to recast his ability 2 additional times, letting him do consecutive slashes. The dashes will become teleports instead for the next 2 additional sword chains. However, if the jump ability is used outside the inner range, he will jump while spraying enemies with his dual guns and his passive abilities like the rockets from the sky, and then he will land and reset all his passive abilities again. This means you can reset the mortar cooldown to spam it if you really wanted to, and if you wanted a pseudo warship. Like, come on, like, you're hearing this and you see all this and you can't tell me this isn't cool, right? Like, just seeing him do all these like cool maneuvers using all his weapons and his sword. Yeah, if you can't tell, I was really sad that Psycho Slayer did not have a sword to slay enemies with. Yeah, and his jump level 2 cooldown has been adjusted from 3 seconds to 6 seconds for the fact that his jump can now reset his passive abilities. His jump is also made to be less clunkier, being more similar to Brawler from TDS, having a lot shorter forward swing and backswing in his animation. And well, those are all the towers, so now we have the enemies. X2 Fighter and X2 Trooper would insta-kill a lot of your towers, and there was just simply no counterplay to it, and everyone finds these guys annoying, right? So now both of them will have a target icon that displays which tower it will target, allowing players time to sell their towers. The X2 Trooper will now drop 4 mines on the map to deal damage to spawner units, and it has a max health threshold to act like a pressurized mine. Jaeger's laser sweep DPS is nerfed to give players more time to react, but it does more damage overall and lasts longer, so do keep that in mind. Nuclear tanks can now damage airborne units to counter Relic Seraphs. E02 is surprisingly an enemy that goes under the radar a lot, as it has every form of resistance at a high amount and it can be very threatening. It's just we never noticed it because spawner meta, every single spawner has ignored detections for some reason. Anyhow, he gains a new ability to drop an anti-tank mine after dying, and it insta-kills any spawner units, but this usually won't affect them too much since they already have really high range, so do keep that in mind. The Dread Cubus and Cyber Cubus both can now shoot mines onto 40 to 60% of the track's length, and it will deal damage to spawner units. The Emperor. To help stealth feel a lot better to use on the final wave, the Emperor can no longer corrupt or target stealth towers with the red beams. I've heard a lot of people say he felt underwhelming to fight, so now he has a new attack, Reversal Red, which lets him charge up a red ball on his fingers before he blasts towers with a Kamehameha beam the size of the gun mech's leg. His Eradicator red clones now leave behind a red vapor field like Golden Minelayer's Thermite, dealing 2000 DPS to any spawners that walk over it. Finally, his attack drones and healing drones drop anti-tank mines that insta-kill any unit spawners once they do die, so you will want to kill them as fast as possible so they don't drop it onto the later parts of the track. So yeah, well, those are all of my changes for every enemy and tower. I hope you enjoyed all of the concepts I had to offer. I know some of the changes may have been pretty controversial, and some were definitely tough for me to make as well, but I had to go through with some of them, especially after hearing everyone else's input and feedback. And keep in mind again, I couldn't test any of these changes and I don't have the same resources as a tester, so me and everyone else did the best we could at balancing these concepts without these resources. That being said, if you have any thoughts on these changes or any thoughts about what you think might happen with this update, feel free to drop it down in the comments below. I always love to read your guys' comments, and it's just always a nice discussion to have. And I personally am super hyped to see what TDX does for its rebalance, as I definitely feel like it's gonna benefit the game in the long term. The meta has been really stale for so long, so this will definitely be a good direction for the game moving forward. I was surprised a lot of people didn't like the shock and awe update for TDS, so I am a little bit worried that this update will not be received as well, but I do have faith that it will turn out good. And I also do think they should have shipped these rebalances with the intermediate and easy reworks, since those should definitely be a high priority right now, but I don't mind getting them earlier than that as long as these mode reworks do happen eventually. But yeah, with that, I hope you have a good one. Thank you for watching this far if you have. You're a real one for that. And as always, savor the cheese, consume the bread, and be one with the bamboo. I'll catch you later. Bye bye!